Hi, I'm Theo Bach, and the topic I chose to research was, does divorce have common positive long-term effects for the children involved? I chose this topic because when I was in 4th grade, about 2 weeks before Christmas, my parents got divorced, and from then on, the weeks were split evenly between my mom and my dad. It was a fairly clean divorce. It wasn't too messy, and I don't think I was too negatively affected from the divorce. But I do believe that if they would have stayed together, I would have been a different person today. And I definitely could see how someone who would not have such a clean divorce as mine could have such negative effects. So I was also interested to see what possible positive or negative effects that I might have encountered as a result of my parents' divorce. And this topic relates to psychology, because how someone thinks and acts is related to their close relationships and how their parents raised them. So these related topics can be seen in Chapter 5 of your textbook. My research on the supportive side of my question consisted of 3 sources, 1 journal article and 2 research studies. My first source is an article by Constance Aarons entitled "No Easy Answers: Why the Popular View on Divorce is Wrong." This article argues that good divorces are invisible and not really shown to the public, and that bad divorces are only seen as the American way of divorce. And a long chain of myths has been resulted from the beliefs and feelings towards divorce, and most of these myths are completely false. The lack of acceptance for non-traditional family arrangements continues to fuel these negative views on divorce and restrict the society of the true information. The article goes on to discuss 7 misconceptions about divorce, and all of these misconceptions are explained as false and have no support to prove them. When put together, these statements form the very negative views we have on divorce today in society. My next supportive source was a research study entitled "Longitude Studies of Effects of Divorce on Children in Great Britain and the United States." This study is conducted in the United States and Great Britain, where a sample of children with intact families were originally interviewed and assessed for behavioral problems and with a mathematics and reading test. And then about 5 years later, the same children were again tested for behavioral and mathematics and reading tests, and the children from intact families who stayed together through marital problems were then compared to children whose families had divorced between the time of these interviews. And the study found that for boys from the divorced families had significantly less behavioral problems and scored higher on the education and reading mathematics tests than the boys who had the families that had stayed intact despite the marital problems. And for girls, the same results had occurred, but less significantly as for boys. And my last supporting research source was another research study entitled "Marital Adaptation, Divorce, and Parent-Infant Development: A Prospective Study." Well, this study was on the effects of the timing of divorce in the child's life and how that can affect them. So this study compared how the children how their parents divorced when they're like the first 2 years of their life, and how that compared to children whose parents had divorced after the first 2 years of their life. And so they found that the children who had come from the families that had marital trouble but stayed intact were more likely to externalize control and were more uncontrolled and more antisocial than the children who had been from divorced families. So my research on the refuting side, again, consisted of 3 sources. My first source is an article entitled by Elizabeth Marget, entitled "The Bad Divorce." This article stated that Constance Aarons' study, which was my first supporting source, she stated that the Constance Aarons' study was completely wrong and ill-performed. And she said the article goes on to say that Aarons misinterpreted much of the data she had gotten and the quotes that her interviewers had responded with. Silence and lack of admitting problems were then discussed as the main problems why children did not speak up against and supported their parents' divorce. The reference concluded with stating that Aaron's study is inaccurate and does not benefit the further studies of divorce. My next source was a research study entitled Sibling Outcomes and Desperate Parenting and Step-Parenting After Divorce, a report from a 10-year longitudinal study. This source is a study of how differences in parenting styles occurred after divorce and with an addition of a step-parent. The study found that 1/2 of the 60 families that were studied, the children had developed different parenting styles and situations after the divorce, and that the parenting style also changed significantly when a step-parent was introduced into the family. These changes were found to have widespread effects on almost all of the kids of the family, and in the entire study, only one family had a step-parent that had a supportive relationship with all the kids in the family, and children whose functioning was not affected too much by the parents' divorce were found to have at least one stable relationship with one of their parents, but was said that the other parent ignored them, or the step-parent also ignored them. So, my last refuting source is entitled Mediation and Moderation of Divorce Effects on Children's Behavior Problems. This is a study of internalizing and externalizing behavior in children between the ages of 5 to 15. It also studied how other certain characteristics of divorce in children can affect the internalizing and externalizing behavior of the children. And the study found that children of divorce had more internalizing and externalizing behavioral problems than children from intact families. The study also found that children of divorce had come from a lower income family had more behavioral problems than children that had come from a higher income family, and also children with a higher IQ were less likely to develop behavioral problems. Finally, the study found that the children were more likely to develop behavioral problems if their home environment was less supportive than before the divorce, if their mother was less sensitive and depressed, and if the household income dropped significantly from before and after the divorce. In conclusion, when I read my research question, does a divorce have positive long-term effects for the children involved? I kind of saw that as saying, are there any positive effects that come from divorce? Because mostly what you see is mostly talk about the negative. And after all my research, I found that despite the majority of negative effects of divorce, there is in fact one long-term positive effect. And this sole positive long-term effect is that divorce can be an escape from the violent and conflict-filled home life, and it can move the violence between the parents to the courtroom, where it cannot directly affect the children and directly harm them. And thank you for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation.
Great, thank you.